Good evening, everyone. Warm greetings, and welcome to the second edition of Arthashastra, IIFT's flagship annual budget discussion. My name is Parijat. I'm from the Public Policy Club, and with me is Rhythm from Capital, the Finance and Investments Club. Now, before we proceed to hearing from our esteemed panelists, we would like to take a few brief moments to summarize the key highlights of the Union Budget 2022. The 2022 budget was delivered with a vision for the future. It focused extensively on complementing macroeconomic growth with microeconomic all-inclusive welfare and sought to steer the Indian economy towards Amrit Kal within the span of the next 25 years. Now, the Indian economy grew by 9.2% in the financial year 2021-22, the fastest growth in the entire world, while the fiscal deficit was 6.9% of India's GDP. These numbers are expected to change to 8.5% and 6.4% respectively in the coming year. The government has also proposed a significant hike in capital expenditure, raising it from 5.54 lakh crores in the preceding fiscal year to 7.5 lakh crores in the current year. The consumer price index averaged at around 5.2% from April to December of 2021, largely because of high fuel prices and rising food inflation. The budget contained major announcements for all key sectors of the economy: infrastructure, education, healthcare, defense, agriculture, finance, and micro, small, and medium enterprises. Infrastructure received the biggest push, with the government announcing the launch of PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan at a cost of rupees 20,000 crores and allocated 195 billion rupees for promoting solar equipment manufacturing industry. New emerging trends within healthcare and education that we saw rising during the pandemic were also met, with the government announcing the launch of a digital university and a national digital health database. In defense, Atmanirbharta was promoted, with the government earmarking 68% of defense capital expenditure on domestic purchases. For agriculture, the government announced the launch of Kisan drones, and for micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has promised to extend the emergency credit line guarantee scheme till March of 2023. Now, Rhythm will brief you on the remaining parts of the budget.
Thank you, Parijat. Moving on to the major policy highlights, the government has decided to launch the digital rupee using blockchain and other technologies in the financial year 22-23. It has also proposed to launch the 5G spectrum auction and public-private partnership contracts to lay optic fiber across the country. In order to help transition India to a green economy, the government has decided to launch green bonds. Further, the government has proposed to revise the existing Special Economic Zone Act as it seeks to enhance exports. Finally, moving on to the tax highlights, the government has decided to make no changes to corporate or personal income taxes. All gains on virtual digital assets will be taxed at 30%, while digital gifting will also be charged at the same rate on the receiver's end. Taxpayers will now have a 2-year window to correct errors and file a revised income tax return for the relevant assessment year, and all the startups incorporated on or before 31st March 23 will receive tax holidays. So in today's discussion, we will be discussing about Union Budget 2022, the future if cryptocurrency in India, infrastructure development in India, PM Gati Shakti, and what is in for the manufacturing and service sector for the budget implications on the indirect taxes and the BFSI sector. Now I request my team to proceed for the introduction of the speakers.
Thank you, Parijat and Rhythm, for giving a wonderful overview of the Union Budget. Now, I would like to welcome our first panelist, Mr. Vivek Jalan. Mr. Vivek Jalan is Chairman of the Fiscal Affairs Committee at the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Sir is a partner at Tax Connect Advisory Services. Sir is also a member of the Regional Advisory Committee of Chief Commissioner of CGST. Sir is a regular columnist in several prominent news dailies, including Economic Times, Times of India, Live Mint, Financial Express, and Hindustan Times. Sir has more than 17 years of experience in the field of indirect and direct taxation and has also authored several books on taxation. Sir is also a visiting faculty at several prominent institutions, including the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. By education, Sir is a CA and a qualified LLB LLM. Sir was also All India rank holder in the CA final examination conducted by the ICAI. Once again, with a sincere gratitude, IIFT welcomes you, sir. Over to you, Urvi.
Thanks, Vivek.
Now I would like to introduce the second speaker for the day, that is Mr. Subhomoy Bhattacharjee, who is a consultant editor with the Business Standard newspaper and also a consultant with Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, RIS. He is also a faculty teaching economics at OP Jindal Global University. Sir studied economics from Sri Ram College of Commerce and Delhi School of Economics and holds a PG diploma in journalism. Sir has also authored Special Economic Zones in India, Myths and Realities, India's first book on the SEZs. His areas of interest include public policy, especially regulatory issues, finance and urban development. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. Now Navya will take it forward.
So our third speaker for today is Dr. Avik Sarkar. Sir is an associate professor at the Indian School of Business, and he's also headed the data analytics cell in Niti Aayog. Sir has had an illustrious career where he has held various positions across companies such as Accenture, IBM, and Nokia. Sir has completed his Ph.D. from the Open University. Sir is a TEDx speaker as well and has been nominated among the top 10 data scientists in India in 2017 by the Analytics India magazine. Sir specializes in working on various aspects of data and emerging technologies for governance and public policy. We welcome you, sir, to our college and this event. Thank you, sir, for coming. Over to you, Sucheta.
Finally, the fourth panelist whom we have is Dr. Dipankar Sinha, and he is currently one of the best-known professors in the area of global trade, operations, and logistics. He heads the research at Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Kolkata campus. Indeed, a man of letters and a doctorate degree holder in industrial engineering from the very reputable IIT Kharagpur. He also served as Deputy Director at Kolkata Port Trust with over 31 years of experience in consultancy, teaching, planning in IT. He has been a part of corporate advisory in multiple companies like Olam International and Reliance Institute Limited as well. A holder of multiple patents and author of numerous books on supply chain, I feel honored to be able to shed light on his achievements and introduce him as a panelist over here. So welcome, Dipankar, sir. And next, we have our moderator for the panel discussion. Yes, sir. And we have moderator of the panel discussion as Dr. Vivek Chaudhary. Dr. Vivek Chaudhary is a very renowned associate professor in the Department of Economics at Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. He also has experience as a consultant at National Council for Applied Economic Research for a brief period. So is a meritorious alumni of prestigious St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, and a doctorate degree holder from Jawaharlal Nehru Vishwavidyalaya. Welcome you, sir, and thank you so much for moderating the session.
Okay, so we are among the I think best panelists we could have had for the kind of topics we want to deliberate on today, which is ranging from GST to expenditure patterns and manufacturing sector, then to CBDC, I think, which is one of the major announcements in the budget this year, and everybody's grappling with kind of what kind of things are coming towards the economy, in the sense that about the design of CBDC and then its problems with implementations and whether it would be at the level of only wholesale or retail. So there are lots of issues, and I think we will hear from the learned panelists on that. And of course, PM Gati Shakti. I think we were actually searching for a lot of speakers, mainly we wanted to hear from people who are from outside the institute, because we always hear from people from within the institute. But why we chose Professor Sinha is that he is a part of that very elite group where we have a logistics cell of the Minister of Commerce in IIFT, and which is very closely related to PM Gati Shakti, because otherwise it's very difficult to understand. Though there are certain announcements regarding PM Gati Shakti, but it's not really very clear from the announcements that actually what it is. So I think he's the best person. Give us some idea about what's happening, some insider's view. So I think that's why, we have invited sir. And if we go through the budget, I have seen a very, lot of changes in the budget. I mean, what Parijat said that, this is the second edition of Arthashastra. Okay, because the name has changed to Arthashastra, but we are having it for the last 15 years. Now, and also the budget, document has undergone a change. And now, previously we had Part A, Part B. It was completely different. Part A used to be, basically the performance of the economy. Part B used to be the announcements. Now it is totally the announcements. Part A is related to non-tax matters. Part B is related to tax matters. And of course, as has been pointed out by my students, that definitely, it's a budget which has spoken about a lot of positive things. And it has been reiterated, I think, a number of times that it is looking at the long term. Those short terms, we are facing a lot of problems. Long term, we want to achieve certain goals, and that's why the reference to Amrit Kal and leading to 100 years of independence. So next 25 years, after 75 years, is a very important time frame to achieve certain goals for the economy. And of course, we need to have a more productive, technologically very sound, economy with a sizable amount of skilled labor force. I think that's where all the efforts are. And as I have seen the budget, right from digitization initiatives to all other initiatives where a lot of investment has been announced, and how it will be financed. They have also mentioned about certain ways it will be financed. And of course, I think pragmatically they have also shown that there will be a shortfall. So our budgeted expenditure will be above the budgeted revenues. So there will be kind of around 6+% of budget deficit. So it's a challenging, I think, atmosphere, and to get to, even though we are above 9% growth and among the fastest growing economies, among the large economies, but that is not enough, because naturally we had a negative growth and slow growth earlier. So it can be because of the base effect. So to come back to the kind of growth rate and the GDP per capita we were at before the pandemic, it would be a big challenge. So we would look forward to the esteemed panelists for their views about how budget, what are the provisions of the budget, and how can we achieve those goals. So I think we'd start with Mr. Avik Sarkar, because he would be discussing, I think, about the expenditure pattern and manufacturing sector per se. We'll start with him, sir. So you can just take around 10 minutes to give your views, and then I'll pass on it to the next speaker.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Chaudhary. So I will focus a bit on the technology side, because that is the area where I focus the most. So on the technology side, particularly, it was quite fascinating to see a few announcements that came up in the budget this year. And these are the type of things that we have been discussing for quite some time. And we have had an ecosystem grown around these issues for a few years. And particularly, I will focus on a few of them. First one is the use of digital technologies and emerging technologies in the area of agriculture. We have seen that there are quite a few startups, particularly, and also big firms who are trying to work with state governments and farmers to increase their yield and give them advisory in real time. So this is something we have seen across the last 5 years, but this has been happening in pockets in a few states, and there a lot of them is a pilot state, and only in a few states that we see they are going on to large scale. And particularly the states where this is happening at large scale are limited to a few ones. So Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, particularly the one where a lot of these startups are established and located also, which helps them to do all these experiments and go onto the field, interact with them, because it's not only doing the work within the startup, but also going to the field, collecting data and doing a lot more of this. So there is a focus on working on the PPP model around this, and so that startups can work with the state government and have a shared ownership of the agricultural aspects of things, because we have close to 50% of our population in this sector, and a focus on PPP for this sector is something that I really welcome there. The other aspect is that, again, on continuing on agriculture particularly, we see that there are certain aspects, like say, if I talk about, say, farming advisory to a farmer. If you have to give advisory to a particular farmer, now these are very small land holdings that Indian farmers own, maybe 1 acre or 2 acre, or very small farm holdings that they own. Such techniques have been used in the West, where say a person owns 50 acres or maybe 100 acres of land, and so geotagging that and monitoring that in real time using drones or satellite imagery is a much more easier thing to do. In here, since the landholding pattern is very small, you cannot rely on a lot of those things like satellite imagery because you have a large land. So drones become very important there. Drones and sensors particularly. So one thing that was announced in the budget and the PM launched just yesterday was the Krishi drones. So they will help in the monitoring of the agriculture fields and help them in providing them real-time insights about what they can do. There has been studies that has been demonstrated in India that if they can tell you on what is the type of seed to be put in, what is the type of fertilizers and amount of fertilizer to be put in given your field, and then based on the weather, advising you when to sow your crop and when to reap the harvest. Just very simple this thing. Instead of each farmer deciding on their own based on their domain expertise, but taking a bit of a science into this whole aspect and trying to predict those. These are very simple predictions, as you will understand. There has been demonstrated that 20 to 30% yield can increase. So Krishi drones will fill up that aspect. So one is that for the startups to work, they need data in real time. So Krishi drones and the sensors will help in filling up this gap. So on the agriculture side, I really welcome these two aspects, which I feel are very important. On the third one is on the healthcare. So like we all have a mobile number today, we all and like I am currently sitting in Chandigarh. My hometown is somewhere where I've say grown up for the first 15 years of my life. Then I spent another 5 years somewhere else, and I have gone to hospitals and clinics whenever I felt sick or I had a medical need. All these records are there with the doctors in different cities and different places. I cannot pull all my health record today. I do not have a visibility of that. So what has the concept that that the Ministry of Health has been toying for a long time is a unique health ID or a record for a patient that will be there in digital format. So something around this has been announced in the budget this year, which is again a very welcome move, because this will lay the platform for a lot of innovation in the health sector. A lot of health tech can be built upon this. So this is, I think, a phenomenal thing that has happened in the sector, and because of COVID and other things, we have seen how important the health sector is. Last, I will touch upon the aspect of digital universities. During COVID, and still, I think it continues only recently in this month of February, we have seen a lot of the state governments opening up the schools. People who are there in cities and metros, their kids could take full advantage of the online education because they had laptops and mobile phones to take what we call as digital education. But if you go into rural areas, this has been one area where we have actually in the last 2 years, we have lost many millions of students because they have lost touch with education completely. I know it is late because the COVID is over, but the government has come up with schemes on digital education and digital universities, which will be there will be a lot of partners who will build those content, and the delivery will happen through Doordarshan. So a thrust on digital education is something that has been called for, which is also a very welcome move that I see. So I will limit to these four key aspects. Agriculture, healthcare, education, because these are very prominent one. I know there is a lot on infrastructure, but I will leave it for the other speakers to focus on.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarkar, for your views on various digital initiatives of the government. Now I will move on to Mr. Bhattacharjee for his speech on especially expenditure pattern and manufacturing. Actually, sorry, I made a mistake. Will I wanted to mention what Mr. Sarkar will speak on. Now over to Mr. Bhattacharjee. Mr. Bhattacharjee, are you there? Yeah, you are. You should unmute, Mr. Bhattacharjee, and Parijat, will you check what is happening?
Yes, sir. I'll show the background.
Or otherwise, we can move to the next speaker. So, in the meantime.
Yes, sir.
So then I will ask Mr. Jalan to elaborate on all the indirect tax proposals that are there in the budget and what are the likely implications. Mr. Jalan, please, can you speak now?
Thank you, Mr. Roy Chaudhary. Am I audible?
Yeah.
So thank you for inviting me to share my views on the taxation proposals and on indirect taxes. Can I touch upon a few areas of direct tax?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we see that put down my views under 5 points as far as the taxation proposals and taxation policy of the government is concerned. Number one, they want to discourage litigation and they want to have a taxation regime wherein concurrent scrutiny is the way forward. I will come to each one of them, separately. The second is they want to show that compliance for businessmen is the way forward to grow their businesses. If you don't comply, you will not be able to grow your businesses. Next, number 3 is they are very clear that taxation is the way the government would earn its income and do its with that money they will do their expenditures, and then due to this COVID and all, due to huge expenditures, they want to enhance their taxation, and technology is the way they want to enhance their taxation so as to track businesses with a 360-degree mechanism. Fourth, a major shift in income tax, and that is why I said I would like to take this as a whole. A major shift in income tax is towards TDS as an alternate taxation mechanism. And last, the government wishes to phase out exemptions going forward. They want that market forces of demand and supply govern businesses. Now I'll come one by one on the explanations and the examples for each of these. First, discourage litigation and ensure that there is concurrent scrutiny or assessments or audits, whatever you might call that. You see, even in income tax, in customs, there are many cases, many judgments of the Supreme Court and the High Court's tribunals which have been negated by this budget. The most important in customs is the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court, which has, struck the Customs Department pan India in the case of Canon India Limited, where after years of litigation, the Honorable Apex Court has held in favor of the taxpayers, importers, that DRI officers, that is the investigating agency, they would not be the people who can call the taxpayers and initiate litigation. Their job is to investigate and thereafter to transfer the cases to the revenue jurisdictional authorities. Now, the Apex Court held this, and in this budget, they have negated this by amending the customs law retrospectively, stating that no, anybody can investigate, anybody can issue show cause notices, anybody can give an assessment order and do assessments. Thereafter, under GST, we have seen in the last year itself, after there is a thing called inverted duty structure under GST. What is inverted duty structure? Say, for example, textile industry. Textile industry takes the services of job workers, where the job workers charge them 18% GST for the services offered. However, the output tax is only 5%. Therefore, this 13% differential, and that's a big amount of 13%, which gets accumulated, the GST of 13%, which they should be getting input tax credit of for exporters, this get accumulated even for the domestic suppliers, it gets accumulated where they do not get refund. So 13% is the additional cost. So after years of litigation, last 3 years it has been going on. The Apex Court has held that no, after a very good hearing from the taxpayers, it has held that no, this ITC, this refund will not be eligible under input tax credit, and therefore this 13% is actually a cost per se to the exporters especially. There are many other judgments in the income tax also, where the High Court's rulings in the case of education cess, where the High Courts have ruled that okay, cess is actually a expenditure of the business. They should be getting a deduction under income tax. That has been negated by a retrospective amendment in the Act. So it is very clear that the focus is on discouraging litigation. And businesses have to be ready, trade and industry have to be ready to reply to notices. They have to have a robust accounting mechanism. Next, compliance is the way forward to grow the business. They have sent a very, very clear message by amending the input tax credit rules under GST. So, just to give an understanding, you must be knowing about GST now, but just to give an understanding of GST from the compliance point of view. Say, for example, you are a manufacturer of solar. Somebody told solar, power and green energy. Let us take that example. Say, suppose you are a manufacturer of solar cells. So what do? You purchase lithium ion battery or lithium ion cells and make solar cells. You purchase lithium ion cells, say for 1 crore rupees, and you pay 5% GST on that. So 1 crore and 5% GST, 5 lakh rupees GST you pay to your supplier. Now you sell this lithium ion battery after manufacturing, you sell it for 2 crores rupees and charge 10 lakh rupees output tax to your supplier. So this 5 to your customer. So this 5 lakh which you get from your supplier, this is your input tax credit, and out of the 10 lakh which you charge to your customer, you have to pay only 5 lakh rupees differential, 10 minus 5 in cash. Balance you can utilize your input tax credit. Now to avail this input tax credit, you have to be sure that your supplier has actually paid this 5 lakh to the government. Widespread litigation is still going on across the country on this in various courts, but they are very, very clear that I am not going to allow you this 5 lakh rupees input tax credit if your supplier defaults. So what it does for large industries, they will employ only those suppliers who are robust with their compliances. So which is very, very important. So even the SME, if you want to do B2B trade, business to business trade, you have to be robust with your compliances. You have to file your returns in time, etc., etc. Otherwise, large industries who are your customers, they will not be purchasing from you. So it is very clear. Yes, what they are exempting from these compliances is those trade and industry, the small shop owners who are doing B2C, who are selling directly to the consumers where no input tax credit is available. Next is enhancement of revenue through technology. So there are two aspects of it. One is enhancement of revenue. So you can see, in GST budget has a little lesser significance than income tax because the GST Council is the federal structure which has all the finance ministers of all the states, and the chairman is or chairperson is the finance minister of the Union of India. That GST Council takes all the decisions regarding rates of GST, etc. And over the last 1 year, we have seen GST rates have only increased. Wherever there was a litigation, they have clarified that, look, higher GST rate will prevail. I will give a small example on this. In the case of ice creams. So ice cream supplied by a restaurant will be chargeable at 5%. Same ice cream supplied by an ice cream parlor will be chargeable at 18%. This has been officially, drafted and told by the GST Council. The other is technology. We have seen faceless assessments, where the taxpayer, we all know how sometimes, erstwhile, how taxation regimes have worked. We have all complained about corruption, etc. in the taxation regime in all departments. So now they have said customs department has gone faceless. Income tax has gone faceless. GST, GST portal is now a huge technology, wing of the government of India by which GST is regulated. In the states, no GST department has any power whatsoever. Everything has to be done through GST portal. So technology, they are focusing on more and more. The entire faceless assessments under income tax that has been revamped. I will not go into the intricacies because of the limitations of time here. Next, TDS in income tax is an alternative taxation regime. Friends, we have seen in the last budget over the last year, TDS generally what we understood, okay, a professional gives services and for services, the recipient will deduct 10%, 5%, 2% TDS. Now they have brought entire goods supplied in the entire country under TDS. So now they are very, very clear that, see, we need money for running the economy. We can't wait till 1 year for the taxpayers to file their income. We want every month. So TDS is a mechanism by which we will collect every month. There is a major change in TDS, even to track the income. So I will give a small example for 1 minute. Now, say for example, you have a industry. Okay, say for example, Hindustan Lever. It gives a target to its dealers that whoever achieves 2 crores rupees of sales in a year, we will take him to a Dubai trip. Friends, now through this TDS mechanism, it will be tracked whether if I am a dealer of Hindustan Lever, I have been taken by Hindustan Lever to a Dubai trip. I have to declare that 1 lakh rupees, whatever Hindustan Lever is spent on me, and offer it to taxation. So I have to pay 30% tax on that Dubai trip expenses incurred by Hindustan Lever. Okay, so this TDS is acting as an alternate tax mechanism. And last, phasing out exemptions. We all know, you must be knowing, you are more expert than me on foreign trade. rod tape rates. Very recently, they have come out. The Honorable Commerce Minister, we went to Delhi. After it came out, the expectations of industry was say X, and all for pan across sectors, the rates is not more than 0.25x, right? So 1/4 almost for all industries across sector. So they are very clear that no more exemptions. In income tax also, they are going that way. In customs, they have clarified that we will give exemptions if at all, maximum for 2 years. After 2 years, we will review the exemptions. So I will, conclude now on this, and I will take it forward after in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jalan. Thank you for very simplistically, explaining the, very complex, issues that are involved in, taxation. Thank you very much for your speech. Now we will move on to Mr. Bhattacharjee. Sir.
Just a second. I need to get my things in order. And I was really listening extremely carefully to what Mr. Jalan had to say and Dr. Sarkar to say, and these were extremely good words. I just wanted to point out, I am a former civil servant. I was 91 batch in civil service. And that SEZ book reminds me that was written long years ago. My current interest is energy sector. My book, India's Coal Story, came out from the Sage a few years ago. It's was one of the best sellers on the coal sector. In fact, I look at the energy sector with a lot of attention because I think that is where a lot of our challenges come through. Let me look at, but for this discussion, I was, in fact, I was quite intrigued by what Mr. Dr. Roy Chaudhary talked about, and I especially about issues regarding the overall direction of the budget, because that is what I suppose would be of salience of use to all my friends here. You've been hearing a lot, and one of the first things that comes from the listening to a panel, a webinar, is that you have to keep on looking at glass, and it becomes a bit boring after time, and you also tend to sort of space out, which is quite okay. So if you feel that at some time you're just listening without really making a sense of what's happening, that's, I can understand. It happens to all of us. So fair enough. Which means that I'll essentially not try to bore you with too many things, but let me just skim through the surface of some things which we talk about. That why is the budget constructed this way, this particular time? Now, one major thing that's happened with the government of India is, and that I think is the most important thing to recognize, is that they have realized they don't have the money. This is something that we have been saying for several decades, that government of India's budget, and Dr. Chaudhary talked about this issue, that part A, part B. Part A essentially was something that we have been always been saying is something that the government presents as, as something that it thinks it wants to do. So it's something like a storyline, a sort of a book idea that I want to do this, I want to do that. It frankly doesn't make, I wouldn't say sense, but I would say it's picture, it's poetry or it's prose, depending on which sort of finance minister you have. The thrust of the budget essentially is the part B, which is where the tax proposals are laid. In fact, in the part A of the budget, you'd find every year, if you go through it carefully, you'd find there's a series of what you would call schemes on which money is allocated. If you look at the next year, or if you look at it after a few years when the government changes, you find that the money which was there in one scheme has been taken out to put into another scheme. Now, why does that happen? That happens because India spends about 40% as per this budget of its receipts on just paying interest. Let me repeat that. out of a total receipts, 40% goes to pay just one thing, which is interest. Of a total expenditure, 25%, the total expenditure of the government, of that, 25% is interest. If you add along with it payments for salary, pensions, defense, and subsidies, there isn't much left for the government. Not just this government, any government. And to put the perspective in order, how much does the India government raise in terms of taxes? Well, all the governments, state and center together, raise just about 10% of the GDP as taxes. At 10% of the GDP, it is lower than any comparable major government, which means that we tax very little. We tax very little and we spend far beyond our ability. By we, I mean the government. So if that is the case, then what is it that the government essentially tries to do when it tries to say, in the finance minister gets up and tries to say, okay, I'll be spending on this and that. Well, essentially, to put it starkly, wo idhar ka topi udhar dalte hain. There's nothing more that the finance minister can do. Which is why we are rather happy. In many of the newspapers you would have noticed, we are happy that this year, and it was something that was continuing from last year too, the government has not changed its expenditure pattern, nor has it tried to raise expenditure, because it doesn't have the money. If it had raised the money, it would have essentially ended up, if it didn't want to do that, idhar ka topi udhar, then it would have essentially been forced to borrow. And as you know, right, people out here, as more borrowing means there's more money. So for the same set of GDP, the same set of goods and supply, services available in the market, if there's more money chasing it, the result is inflation. And whom does inflation hurt the most? The poorest. So one big thing that we are comfortable with in this particular budget is the government has not given a push to inflation, because inflation hurts the poorest. We are talking about inequality. We are talking about the fact that the COVID has been harsh on the lower income groups. We don't want inflation to therefore come along to be able to deal an additional blow on them. That's the first important thing on the budget. So whatever money the finance minister had, the finance minister has just put into infrastructure spend, which we think is a jolly good idea. So, but in there's an interesting thing, that when it has done it, does it mean that the government is therefore shifting away from welfare to infrastructure? Now, this is a new area, which is a new thrust area, which we need to think a bit more carefully. I'm sure you'll be doing that in your classes sometimes. Later on, if we have a chance, we can discuss. But it is a distinct change that's happening. And when it is doing so, is it because of the realization that essentially schemes, the centrally sponsored schemes, end up tying up more state resources? So the states are not comfortable getting those things. You would have heard that the
I think we have lost connection with him. No?
It's very high. It is 6.92% that the government is borrowing. So is this sort of thing something useful for the government to do? So what are we essentially saying? What are we essentially saying? By the way, was my presentation visible? Dr. Chaudhary?
No.
It was not. So that's even better, because that means that I can actually send the presentation across to the students whenever it's comfortable for them. But let me try to do it once again. Is it visible now?
No, sir.
It's not.
Have you given the presentation rights, Parijat? He has to be
Yes,
given the
sir.
presentation
Yes,
rights.
sir. Presenters have the presentation right.
Is there?
Might be there is some problem, I think, in sharing.
Shouldn't be, but anyway, that doesn't matter. I think we can carry on with our story. What we are doing is essentially, therefore, saying that the government is hamstrung by what it wants to do, and when it wants to do things, it's actually not able. I mean, it is better that it doesn't do too many things. Mr. Jalan rightly pointed out that essentially the government is trying to raise taxes, and it's going through all sorts of means, like making the TDS regime stiffer, not giving tax credit for inputs for in lots of cases, going against court cases. What does it show? It just shows that the government essentially doesn't have the money to. I mean, it's like to squeeze every penny out from the tax kitty, short of raising tax rates. And that is an important point, because if it cannot do that, then it has got a deep problem on its hand. So that is what the first part of what I was discussing. I think now you can see it, isn't it?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah. So that is one of the first things. The second part is that relating to what the welfare versus infrastructure is. I am not convinced, and on this, it's a controversial thing, that NREG is the only way to improve rural income. A government cannot be a dole giving authority. It has to create income for the people. And just to expect that dole will be the way in which income will rise, or whether people will be surviving, is perpetuating a very dangerous position. My study of NREG over the last 10 years shows that irrespective of whichever year the growth, whatever the trend in the growth has been, NREG demand has risen. So NREG has actually picked up the same trend of other social sector schemes that will simply keep on rising, the demand for it, simply because it's a demand-driven thing. That's not the way we want the economy to go. So once the COVID impact is out, and in India, to say that the impact is out of something, it takes time. But even then, I would say that NREG is not the right way to think of improving rural income. When we're talking about raising consumption, just providing doles will not help. Anyway, so as you can see, there are rest of the things. The capex to fiscal deficit ratio, which is the most important part in the discussion about the budget this time, my third row, has actually risen, and it has risen considerably to 45.2% in FY23. That's the current one. Even after making allowances for one-off items, the central government is spending much more on capital expenditure. This is something that is worth thinking about. That means that the government is saying that I'll be spending my whatever money I can earn to spend on these sort of things. Dr. Sarkar talked about the issues about drone expenditure on drones, expenditure on other infrastructure, technical IT sector stuff. Now, all of these are essentially an indication of the same trend which you're seeing here in this chart, that the government is more keen to spend whatever money it has, whatever it can scrounge around for capex, with the idea that this will actually create a multiplier, a faster multiplier. Every expenditure is a multiplier. This will be a faster multiplier. So that is what is necessary. Now, you might say that, are we in that per capita income level where we can shift away from welfare to just capex? Well, I would agree with you that yes, we are not in that position, but surprisingly, or rather, even if you look at government papers, it doesn't stay all that surprised. Probably Dr. Chaudhary will actually be able to guide you. later on about this. Government is not the best way to spend money for giving help in health, education, and other sectors. There's a lot of demand that comes along that we should be spending money for more health, for more expenditure on education, for more on women and others. Now, just take this example. This is the unspent funds, and this is the Government of India data. You can all check it. I'll be sending you the slide so you can have a look at it. Just look at the amount of money, the third amount of money, the grant made and the money that has been returned. Remember, these numbers are not the budget numbers because there's the total numbers for the year. There's a difference, but you can see from the percentages. Health and family welfare, of the 1,36,000, 1.36 trillion rupees that the money has been spent in a COVID year, 44,000, almost 45,000 crore rupees have come back. School education of 1.6 trillion, 22,000 crore has come back. And this is not just center. This center states because of the fact that these sort of money spending, when the government tries to push into the system, the money doesn't get spent. So all that criticism that happens, that government is not spending money, people do not understand. And this is a point that I stop here at this point to say, it is not the lack of money which holds up development. It is a very wrong impression, as the data clearly tells you. It is not the lack of money at all. It is the inability of the systems to spend that money. Why so? Take an example. It's very intuitive. If you look at a road project you can see, supposing a road is being built from, say, Kolkata to Asansol, you can see how much has been the progress. The money there is clear that how much money will be needed. But what about an educational outcome? What about a health outcome? It is not money that holds it up. It is the ability of the state and, more important, municipal governments. None of us, you and me included, ask the municipal governments, panchayats, what they have done with the money. Unless you ask those questions to the state, to especially municipalities and panchayats, you will never get improved health or educational outcomes. Central governments can pump in as much money as you want, 6%, 80%, 100%. The result will still be the same. We do not ask for accountability from our neighborhood. And believe me, boys and girls, if you do not ask that, if we do not ask that, we are not going to get any health or educational outcome in the way that we want it. So there are lots of other examples that we can go on, but let's stop here for a minute. Thank you.
I think, we should be thankful to Mr. Bhattacharjee for giving such a different perspective. I mean, that's, I think, quite different from what we see in popular media and also popular perceptions. So it's not the inability or, it's not the lack of funds, but it's the inability to absorb those funds. I mean, so I think that's a very, very important point, and that should educate us to ask questions and also to evaluate what government announces and the outcomes that we see. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhattacharjee. We'll again come back to you when the students ask questions. Now I'll request Professor Sinha to give his view on the PM Gati Shakti.
Thank you, Dr. Vivek, and a very good evening to the august panelists and dear students. This terminology PM Gati Shakti has been quite widely in news and media, and to decipher what it is all about, so far I understand is that it is a way to encapsulate all the infrastructure related projects under supporting the logistics of the country are to be brought under a single umbrella. Basically a way to monitor the project, basically to coordinate between the projects, basically to make it more transparent to the end users, so that private players and other investors can look into the scope of investments and ensure that the logistics efficiency of the country goes up. So far, the budget goes. The budget speech of the finance minister mentions about the PM Gati Shakti. But with every budget, there is an outcome budget document. This outcome budget document talks about the allocations made in the different sectors of the country. And basically, it spells out the ministry-wise or the department-wise allocations. So if you look here, we can see allocations in different ministries, but we do not find its summary under the PM Gati Shakti. So there is no separate summarization of PM Gati Shakti. So one can obviously do that of our own. So what I tried to work out to look into the capex or the capital expenditure on infrastructure. And I find that it is to the tune of 1.10 lakh crore rupee INR, on which the railways have, the national highways have the maximum share, around 77,000 crores, followed by the railways around 30,000 crores and the rural highways. So I don't find the mention about any budgetary allocation to the ports and shipping, though they are very crucial. I think the allocations of the previous years could be good enough to pull on along with this year, because all these infrastructure projects, one needs to keep in mind, has got a longer gestation period. First of all, to call for tenders, and then if it is a PPP model, then look out for the model concession agreement, and then settle out with the issuing of the work order, and then followed up by construction of the infrastructure, the buildings and the ports and the jetties, roads. So it takes 1 year or 2 years time. So basically, maybe this year we'll not be able to see any such light of quickly, unless there has been some tendering going on in the previous year and will mature this year. So that's the practical side of it. Looking at the different infrastructure departments or ministries or the sectors that the government has proposed includes the road, rail, port, and they have included mass transport separately, and the infrastructure, wherein in infrastructure they have included, the ropeways and the pipelines. So we have Bharatmala for the roadways, Sagarmala for the ports and shipping, Parvatmala for the roadways, Udan for airways, and then we have IWT projects. And there are many other, parallel projects going on, which has been declared from time to time by the individual ministries. So in nutshell, if you talk of the budget, 1.10 lakh capex, and the distribution is there. What my take on this is that, first of all, National Highway has got the maximum lift of 133% increase over the previous year, followed by railways to the tune of 28%, and rural roads to the extent of 27%. Now the issue is that India is aiming to make a modal shift from road to rail. At present, road is around 70% and more than 70%, and less than 30% is the railways. Since railways are said to be more sustainable in nature, and sustainability and clean energy is also part of the PM Gati Shakti plan, I do not know whether the allocations made in the railway budget will be able to make the modal shift, though there has been a 10-year vision plan available in the railway site where they promise to increase the modal shift from 27% to 45%. And when I look into the different units of measurement, every decision that we take should have a metric of measurement, and every metric of measurement should follow a SMART rule. It should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. I find in case of rail, the metric of measurement is net ton kilometer. Whereas in case of roads, I find it is as per the length of the road, and some mention about percentage increase of roads to 4 lanes. But at the end of the day, what is the ultimate objective in a good, efficient logistics system? To increase the throughput. And for increasing the throughput, the metric of measurement, I think, should be tons per kilometer per hour. That defines the capacity. Per hour can be converted to per day and when converted to an annual throughput for that matter. And this annual throughput should be compatible to the production throughput so that the distribution required in the domestic and the global market is met by the logistics infrastructure we have. Most of the plans that are set in are based on specific ports, specific highways. And my take on this is that we should focus on the cargo mix. How much of iron ore, coal, cement, bulk cargo, container cargo, apparels, electronic industries, agricultural, perishable goods are going to move, and in which direction? What is the origin and direction? What is the OD? Right? Origin and direction. What is the direction? And in these directions, whether the capacities are good enough. And next, that the KPIs that do not match amongst each other in terms of ton kilometers per hour. So I feel that in roads, instead of sticking to the length, we should stick to the volume carried, right? That is number of lanes multiplied by the length. And therefore, we need to ensure that for every modal mix, that is how much of rail will carry, how much waterways will carry, and how much roadways will carry the freight. According to the modal mix, the cargo mix should be distributed. And then we should determine the capacity of each of these modal mix. So at present, what is the total capacity that can move the throughput per mode of transport in the country? So the speed at which the goods move, the number of lanes in the road or the rake availability in case of railways, and the efficiency. Because at the end of the day, all we do is to reduce the logistics cost. In many cases, we have seen the facilities provided by the individual ministries have enhanced the cost of logistics, like the electronic cargo tracking system, and that's things have been introduced in the past, which has increased the logistics cost. So it has to be sustainable in terms of profitability as well as in terms of the planet, that we keep our emissions and use clean energy. So ultimately, what we should do, that budget is an intention. It is not an operational, it is a strategic document. But we need to take immediately steps that how these are going to be implemented. Like our previous speaker said, rightfully, that half of the expenditures are not met. And if you look into the tendering system of the government, I think on an average, no tender gets successful in the first call. And there is at least one discharge of tender for every tender published by the ministries for that matter. So that being the case, we need to ensure that ultimately throughput should increase. Logistics cost, not in terms of GDP, because that makes a lot of confusion. Because tomorrow, if we have got high value goods, they will obviously move by air. And air cost is higher than ship. So if if the cost of logistics goes up, it is not to be of concern that why it is going up. But per se, I'll say logistics at the cost of as a percentage of the ex-factory price. So that should come down. Throughput should increase. That is production. Rate of production should meet the rate of flow of cargo. And at the end, the welfare should come in. The employment, decrease in accident rates, increase in the real income of the people. Moment goods go on at the right time, at the right place, and in the right form, the opportunity cost or the opportunity losses are minimized. That's what is my take on this particular subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for those very, very detailed analysis of budget related to the infrastructure sector, specifically the Shakti. So now we will open the floor for questions from the students. So I think you can raise your hands, and you can also mention to which of the panelists you are directing the question, so that they can answer it. Okay, so I have Satyapriya.
Good evening, everyone. So my question was to Subhomoy sir, and sir, like you have vast experience in the SEZ sector. So the government is coming up with the new SEZ policy. So how do you see it impacting the country?
This is a question that shouldn't have come. I'll tell you why, Satyapriya. First of all, SEZ book I wrote about 10 years ago, and at that time also I'd said, in fact, Vivek Jalan, when he was writing the introduction to my book, he said it was the second best option. See, there's nothing better than having an entire country's infrastructure rise and do well. That's sure well. If you can't, obviously you need infrastructure, you need an SEZ. Because if you are going to say that I want industry's cost of doing business to be competitive across geographies, then you got to provide power, labor, roads, all of these at a competitive basis. So SEZ therefore makes sense in that context. My only concern is that probably the time for SEZs is, in the global scheme of things, is possibly over. The high noon of manufacturing sector was early 2000 globally. Now the factor productivity that is rising, technology and all that, of course, there are lots of new things coming. I'm not sure whether SEZ per se of that sort it would be something that industry would be looking out for. If you look at, for instance, the PLI schemes that the government has rolled out for different sectors, and it'll be instructive for you all to have a look at what the industry's response has been, company-wise response. Companies have asked for specific things. Nobody has asked for, positioning their industry in an SEZ. So in a tax enclave or in a labor enclave. So essentially, I don't think that demand from industry is there. So it is like the horse is bolted. So that's my sense of the SEZ phenomena. So the government is, of course, free to go ahead and start an SEZ. I suspect there won't be too many, the cutting edge companies that are coming in, semiconductor, electronics, anybody would really be needing an SEZ per se. That's my sense. You can ask Mr. Jalan, but I suspect even his clients also are not asking for SEZ benefits. That sort of benefits.
Yeah, Mr. Jalan, you want to say something?
Yeah, actually, my clients, whatever they get, the more the better. So, yeah, they are always on lookout for more and more schemes. But yeah, the response for this PLI scheme has been very, very good. In fact, the ask now is to bring this PLI to even, the manufacturing, the slab of this PLI, the ask is to reduce that so more companies can get into this PLI rather than getting an SEZ and setting up an industry somewhere. Yeah, that is right.
Okay, next, Disha.
Good evening, all of you. Thank you for your opinions on the budget. So my question is what are the evolving constraint sets from a macro standpoint? What are the bottlenecks that can come? It's my question to all the panelists.
Chaudhary will decide the sequence.
I think we can. We can start with Mr. Sarkar.
Sure, sir.
I guess Professor Subhomoy will be better positioned to take this.
Hello? No, I think it's... Don't ask a journal to speak so much. And we always gap, whether on television or on radio. So we talk too much. Short macro, inflation, interest challenge. That's the most difficult challenge that's coming up. Essentially, inflation, lots of people talk about it. The basic point is our GDP has contracted. from 2019-20, 2021 GDP, and 2022 GDP. Or if you look at 2020 GDP, is lesser than 2019-20. So it means we've got a less number of goods and services, but we've got more money in the system. That means there's going to be inflation. So that is the biggest challenge. That we have got our money supply is rising. Obviously, it'll rise, but the stock of goods and services is less than what it was in 1920. So what do you expect? Inflation? That's given, and the fact that there's international inflation also. That means we are also importing a part of that. So that's the biggest challenge, I would think, at this point. Whether we look at inequality or anything, this is, I think, the biggest constraint that will need to be sorted, and rather will be occupying us for quite some time. Yeah.
Next, we have Shubham. Shubham.
Okay, thank you, sir, and thank you all the panelists for such an amazing session. Sir, my question is to Subhomoy sir again, and the question basically revolves around that as the budding managers who are mostly going to work in service or manufacturing sector. So what do you think will be our key takeaways from this year's budget, and which will have a long-term impact on basically if I consider these two sectors? So what all impact and what are the key takeaways for us?
By two sectors, you mean within services, which two, or services generally?
Sir, the two sectors I meant was that in service general and in manufacturing general.
Well, manufacturing is, the government has started PLI. Remember, our manufacturing sector is now smaller than the agriculture sector. It's a phenomena that has not been seen in any country, which is growing rapidly, that the agricultural sector has overtaken the manufacturing sector. So that is how far it will travel, we'll have to see, but it is definitely not the biggest, job provider at the moment or in terms of growth. PLI, we'll have to see how it pans out. We are all hoping that it does some good work. So it's as of now, you and I, we are both the same boat in terms of observing. Services sector's biggest challenge, from the budget has done nothing wrong for the services sector. It has pushed for infrastructure creation, which is very good. The government has conserved its resources and has spent it well. Good, we like that. If subsequent governments keep on doing that, that's great. In terms of providing skilled manpower, if you're expecting the government to have done the work, no, the government hasn't done the work. And frankly, if you say who should have done the work, it's a very big, difficult choice. Today, if you're a startup, one of your challenge would be to get skilled people. IT people's prices are rising because simply there are not too few of them. Even in other sectors also, their supply is shortage is showing up. It requires skill intervention. Frankly, that's a very big challenge. We are grappling with it. All suggestions are welcome, but there are no very good answers. It's a great opportunity to set up skilling institutes, but making the connection between you set up an institute and where your guys will be getting jobs is a difficult one. One can understand it from, say, the point of view of, say, a OYO or somebody like service delivery like Swiggy. There the requirements are clear, but when it becomes at a higher skill set, like for instance drone, how do you teach drone technology? There aren't simply places out here in India which are teaching drone technology. I would like to hear from Dr. Sarkar if there are any good places.
No, I think you are bang on. I was thinking that the skilling aspect is very important, both for manufacturing, services, and if you also see, you didn't mention about agriculture, which is the largest one. There is a lot of scope of doing things there, because there are too many people working in a very inefficient manner, and there's a large scope for bringing in efficiencies and reap-profit out of it, and there is a business opportunities there. So digitization, skilling are some of the important things that will play a very important role. As you see one mindset that I've seen here whenever I talk to business school is that you always are in a set of looking for a job. There are jobs in the market which are there, but there are a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities, because today we are living in a world where there are zillions of problems to be solved. Some has a social aspect, some has just solving a societal problems, and that is a area that you can look into. And there are lots of avenues, like say as Mr. Subhomoy mentioned about the drone pilots. There are, I think, 2 or 3 institutes in India which are providing drone pilots. The whole aspects of drone, you can have services like you have now, like say pumping out water from a farm in agriculture. You can just buy a drone or a set of drones and then fly them over someone. So you just train our buy drones, have some people who can fly them, and you can collect data from the firms every 1 week, every 1 month, and that gives you a revenue model. But this is not something that anyone will employ you for. This is something that the entrepreneur has to start this, and there are millions of such opportunities. Again, if you go into sensors, I work a lot on the healthcare sector and the agriculture sector, so a lot of my examples are from those. So excuse me for that.
Thank you.
Next, Gaurav. Gaurav, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good evening to the panelists. So my question is to Avik, sir. So the government is planning to launch a central bank digital currency in the coming financial year. So I wanted to know your opinion. Is our infrastructure the people actually institutionalize this change in about a year? And as to how this will be implemented, will there be a digital wallet of sorts, or will there be a provision to exchange of this digital currency into other forms of digital currency as well?
Yes, so that's a very interesting area, and when we saw this taxation on the digital currency, I was myself surprised there, because on one end they are not legitimizing the whole aspect, and they are talking about blockchain-based infrastructure for doing this. This is going to make this thing much more compute intensive, and we still do not have that infrastructure ready for scaling up at large scale. So that is a aspect that I see is worrying. So I think the majority what the government plans to do, at least in the part, is that people who are investing in the cryptos which are based outside India, so taxing them. But I think they also very clearly mentioned that they are not legitimizing that aspect. So I do look into these issues on the cryptocurrencies and these things, but I personally found the government's message quite confusing, and so I really do not have because I would have given you a clear indication, but I found they are talking about one thing, but they're also telling that we will not legitimize the whole thing. They are telling that RBI will come out with some sort of a digital currency, but we are not very sure about what they are going to do. So I think we have to wait and watch and see what that form that's take, because the whole objective is that if a central bank comes up with a digital currency, then the way this digital currency works, you do not have a central bank controlling them. So that whole concept itself conflicts what they are talking about. Sorry, I just confused you more.
No, sir. I just wanted to know your opinion. So yeah.
Okay, next, Ashish.
Yes, sir. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for this very informative session. My doubt is that is the budget clarified that cess and surcharge will not be allowed to be claimed as deductions in the form of expenditure. I just wanted to know what would be the revenue implications of it from various stakeholders like governments, high net worth individuals, etc.
Mr. Jalan.
Yeah.
Just to Vivek, sir.
So, as far as revenue implication is concerned, it is very clear the government's revenue will increase. There is no doubt about it, because all the cases regarding disputes, for education says surcharge, etc., will come to an end because this is a retrospective amendment. As far as trade and industry is concerned, again, all disputes will end, but they will have to pay for whatever litigations they has cropped up. My view on this was unfound litigation as the first step, and they relied on various data, high courts, how they work in this country. There are very few judges who are good at taxation and understanding taxation. That also, they listen to a case for 1 minute and then they give their verdict on complex cases. So their judgments also which had come, they were not in the line of what actually was being this cess and surcharge in income tax. There was a separate circular. So net, I think the litigation around this education cess was unfound. Now it has been clarified with retrospective effect that education cess will not be allowed as a deduction. Industry will have to plow back its cases, pay off whatever was not paid, along with interest, not penalty, and the government will gain on the revenue. Again, the first point which I told you all in this in my earliest lecture was the government is very clear that on policy matters they will not let any litigation prevail. They will come out with a retrospective amendment. Yeah.
Next, we have Ankit.
See, there are two categories, okay, broad categories. If you talk about middle class, one is the middle class businessman, MSME, what you call. The second is the consumer middle class. Number one, for the MSME sector, the government is very, very clear that they have to keep their books of accounts correctly and concurrently. There was a time when MSMEs, businesses, trade and industry, MSME, they used to prepare their books of account once at the end of the year while filing their income tax return. Those days are gone. Now with GST coming in, they will get notices, they will have, every month they will have to answer queries from the tax authorities. So this is very clear, and we have been talking about trade and industry over here, which sectors to get into. What, since my first 5-6 years I was in industry, I can tell as good managers, business managers today have to understand taxation reasonably well. Don't get, maybe not the expenditure part, income tax, but indirect taxation, GST, customs, foreign trade policy, these have to be understood very well. The other part is for the middle class consumers. There has been some talk on the 80C deduction, middle class consumer, all of us, including Dr. Roy Chaudhary. He will be looking at the budget and seeing mainly two things. What is 80C? Has investments? Have they increased the investments? And second is, as the tax reduced, have they increased the threshold, right? It was expected because in the last 8 years, even if you take a 5-6% inflation on an average, it should have doubled this 80C deduction. But on the other hand, the government does not have money. They have spent so much on COVID and all. It is good that they have not actually increased the rates of taxes. So they have held on to that thing, they have kept it stable. Maybe after 1 or 2 years, when the economy stabilizes, they will further push into and give more relaxations.
Okay. Minal?
Good evening to all. So my question is primarily to Subhomoy sir. Sir, you mentioned about the fact that rolling doles is not enough, and it's the inability of the system to spend it wisely. Now, I was just thinking about the concept of UPI, which was mooted a few years ago. Do you think if we have, one-time payment, will that ease the burden on the systems and make the system more efficient in terms of, ensuring that the right thing goes to the right person? Will it be a silver bullet?
By one-time payment, do you mean a direct benefit transfer?
Direct benefit transfer, yes, and also, you are just removing all the subsidies and you are just giving one payment. The universal basic income thing, where you are just giving one payment to one person, and then you are like something of those grounds where where the person is not getting payments every he's not getting periodically per se.
Yeah, Mrinal, I get your point. I mean, that's a very wise point. Let's put it this way. A government, and this brings in a political economy issue, a government is not just a money distributing thing. It also has it's also the will of the people. For instance, if there's an iodine deficiency among women, you can give money for sure. But the idea is that the iodine deficiency should be cured. So, the government has a role, or in the case of the vaccines, you can give a monetary incentive. You just give the money to the people that fine, you've got the money now go you and get vaccinated and just provide adequate vaccination. But is that the role of the government only? The government is also a social harbinger. We were talking about health outcomes, we were talking about educational outcomes recently, in this panel itself. The government also has that role. So universal basic income, yes, it's necessary to that extent that it cuts away the role of intermediaries, particularly in poorly organized states. And many of the Eastern Indian states are very bad in terms of the administrative apparatus. The money doesn't reach the poor, what is meant for them. So I fully take on board your concern that the money should come directly through the UPI channel. In fact, direct benefit transfer through the means of bank, through the means of UPI is a wonderful idea. It cuts through. But there are lots of other interventions which the government must stand there at the spot where the poor is and deliver and get those things done. So, for instance, there are lots of social challenges if you look at, and economists keep on wrestling with this, which are not necessarily amenable to monetary inducements, where it's a question of social change. A very old one was a dowry. You really can't think of any monetary incentive to create an antidote to dowry. And there are lots more complicated ones. The preference for male child over girl, whatever, female child. The preference for going to school, make the child stay at home. Now, universal basic income can give the fees, but will it ensure that the child actually gets the education? That is where government agencies, and that's why I made that point that let's not stay fixated on central government. Let us look very strongly on what the states do with the money that they have. Let us look very carefully at what municipalities do and force them to do it. The drain outside your home doesn't stay clean. And it's not because of the money is not there. It's simply because the sweeper has been paid, but there's nobody there to ensure accountability from that sweeper. Girls are from poor localities, do not go to offices, do not go for work. Why? Because in the evenings, the street lights are not there. They feel scared. Their family members feel scared of them coming back late at night. Now, whose responsibility is to fix the bulb? Not the finance minister of India. It is the local municipal person. We do not fix accountability there. Yet a single light bulb on the street can do so much for women empowerment. We often seem to forget that. And bright people like you should force these changes. Remarkable changes come in if these sort of things are done, rather than looking at fiscal deficit of the center or inflation. We get much more work done. And developed countries and developing countries, the difference often is about the accountability which the local officials are made to undertake in the developed countries than in developing countries. That's my short take.
Okay, sir. So basically, democratization and decentralization of the services.
Decentralization is already there. There's enough powers available. There's enough resources available. It doesn't take a world of money to fix a light bulb. It is simply that guy is lazy, or he doesn't ensure that the light bulb isn't broken. Similarly, the drain gets cleaned every day. There'll be no Padma Shri for getting a drain cleaned. But it must be done every day by the concerned officials. They're getting paid for it. And believe me, municipal officials get paid very well. Across India, they get extremely good salary. Why don't they deliver? Because we don't demand accountability. It's not about decentralization. Non-government organizations often find it very comfortable to focus on central government because that's where publicity is. But let's move to the state and to the municipalities and demand accountability there. Why aren't those people delivering? And as I said, there are so many examples that you can think of. Why doesn't the bus run on time? Which finance minister will ensure that? It is the responsibility of the municipal government. And they're paid well. That's a problem. They're paid well, but they don't do the work. Similarly for school teachers, they're paid well. The periodic, this upsurge that suddenly happens, we didn't get paid salary. That's absolute rubbish. That only happens. They don't say, they come to the streets when they don't get the salary, but they don't tell you about the time when they got the salary and stayed at home. So what's happening? That is where we need to focus, very strongly. Thank you.
Pranav?
Good evening all. My question is for Dipankar sir, or anyone can add to this. So as budget gave the boost to the PM Gati Shakti plan, and as you mentioned that there are still problems persist in the system, like acquisition delays and approvals and environmental clearance also. So even after this, sir, can we expect faster rate of implementation for such huge infrastructure?
Dipankar sir is on mute.
Dipankar sir, are you there?
Yeah, partially we will get results, but you have to understand that we need to take a holistic approach, because any section of the movement, if it is slow or delayed or damages happen, that serve as the constraint to the entire logistics chain. So it has to be end to end. Last mile and the first mile should match in terms of delivery. So that has to be taken care. As I said, budget is an intention of the government to do the right things, but implementing agencies need to take it forward with the right perspective. What I find is that the focus is something confusing between strategic and operational matters. Operations will come into place only after the strategies are put in place. Like I said, what could be the modal mix, the nodal mix, what kind of nodes you are aiming to develop. Only if you are spending more on roads and less on railways, so obviously the gap between movement by road and the rail would always be there. So how to take care of that? And there are a lot of cargo terminals handled by, there has been mention about 100 cargo terminals. So my question is, which 100 cargo terminals? Are they integrated or only they are related to the railway sidings? Because there are many states in the Northeast which do not have any railway sidings for that matter, and they very badly need cargo terminals. And not such dedicated terminals that is for railway and this terminal is for roadway. It should be an integrated freight station, so that any mode of transport and any carrier I choose, I should be able to have that, because some exporters have very small consignments and they do not fill up the entire container space, and neither there is any container station. You'll find blind spots in Himachal, you'll find blind spots in Karnataka, you'll find blind spots in Odisha, and entire Northeast is blank. Only there is one ICD in Assam, that is Amingaon ICD, Inland Container Depot. So yes, it will yield results. Only thing, how good it is implemented. PM Gati Shakti has to be, someone has to take charge of all the 7 components of the infrastructure which the plan envisages. So how they are going to do. Every project has its own, the critical path. If you want to make a mega success, you have to take all the critical paths and then design a critical path of the country as a whole. So who is going to do that? What is the exercise that we are doing? We are only taking individual views and trying to work on that. That's my point.
Okay, I think there are no further hands that are raised that I'm seeing. So from my side, I thank all the panelists for taking time out of their very busy schedule and giving us their valuable views. And one thing I think, what we are ultimately coming to is that there can be many announcements, and they can have, I think, very lofty objectives. They may sound very good, but at the end of the day, the financing part is very important. And also, what I gather from the speakers is that also it is the implementation part, I think, where the last mile connectivity in terms of infrastructure and the last mile, I would say, responsibility which the people have, where actually the major improvements can happen. And I think that's a very important takeaway from this discussion. So I now I'll hand over it to Parijat. Now Parijat, you can give your concluding remarks, or whoever.
Yes, thank you, sir. So thank you, Vivek sir, Avik sir, Subhomoy sir, Vivek sir, and Dipankar sir. And also thank you to all of you, my fellow batchmates, for your enthusiastic participation and for making this session insightful and interactive. Now, I believe that all of us will be leaving this session with a much better understanding of the budget in the context of the state of our economy and of the opportunities and challenges that lie before us. As we conclude this evening, let us renew our commitment to be aware citizens who contribute their best to the development of our national and global economies. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.